Tonight, Keith McHenry, founder of Food Not Bombs, talks about his new book, The Anarchist Cookbook, the 2015 edition.
Thanks for coming, and I'm going to talk a little about the Anarchist Cookbook and about Food Not Bombs. So I'm one of the original 8 kids that started Food Not Bombs in 1980 in Boston, and there's 3 stories that become Food Not Bombs. And one of them was that a friend of mine, Brian Feigenbaum, was arrested at a protest at the Secret Nuclear Power Station on May 24th, 1980, which is it's the day that we mark the founding of Food Not Bombs, because the 8 of us that became Food Not Bombs all united around his arrest to organize his legal defense. And part of what we did was bake sales, and we would be out in front of the student union at Boston University, where Brian and I went to school, or we'd be in Harvard Square, and we'd sell our baked goods, try to raise money for his legal defense, and we usually made almost no money. So at the same time, I had an old van, and I was moving this family, and they were throwing out a poster that said, wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed, and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber. And this is a copy of that poster that we secured from them. They were throwing it away, and we just mounted it on cardboard and set it up next to our table. And we bought military uniforms and dressed up as generals and told people we're trying to buy a bomber and help us out. We're doing a bake sale to buy a bomber. And people would walk by and go, wow, that just seems so weird, really? And then we would tell them really that we were trying to organize a legal defense for Brian, and that the whole reason that he was arrested is because we were protesting the building of a nuclear power station north of the city. And then the second thing that happened was I was a produce worker at a natural food store called Bread Circus, and I was throwing away all this great organic produce, and I felt horrible about it. So I started taking it to the housing projects nearby, and I took it to, I'd hand out the food to them, and we would all get talking. And it was near MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and there was a huge, vast vacant lot behind the university, but they were slowly starting to build buildings, and the building directly across the street from the housing project was a lab where they were designing the guidance system for intercontinental nuclear missiles. And so that gave us the idea to have the name Food Not Bombs, because it was outrageous that these housing projects were falling apart, and that there were had all this money to build this glass tower across the street. And then the final thing that became Food Not Bombs was really, and it's in the way that we see Food Not Bombs today, was that we realized that the Bank of Boston's board of directors were the same board of directors of the company ordering the nuclear power station. They were on the board of the company building the nuclear power station. They were on the boards of Lockheed Martin and Raytheon Missile System and all these nuclear weapons companies in New England, and that they were basically lending themselves money without any public oversight. And that we felt that was very similar to what banks did that caused the Great Depression. So we decided we would dress up as hobos and take some of the food I was taking to the housing projects, make it into a big pot of soup, tell people we're going to have a soup line at 12 noon outside of the stockholders meeting at the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston, and that we would hand out this food. And when we're making this pot of soup, we got worried that there wouldn't be a lot of people, and we have this fantastic vegan organic stew. And so I went to one of the only shelters in town, Pine Street Inn, and I gave a little speech at midnight to the guys living there. And they were like, this is great, a protest like the 60s, and they were really into it. And so the next day they showed up, and we had all these guys that lived at the inn, and people that were business people walking by, and some of the stockholders actually, some flipped us off and were mad that we were there, but others came and hung out with us. And it was this amazing community, diverse community of people all talking about the policies of the Bank of Boston and why we were protesting them. And the homeless guys were like, there's no food for homeless people in Boston. It would be great if we did this every day. So we decided we would quit our jobs that night when we we were like all washing the pots and pans and just do nothing but collect food and take it to the projects and take it to shelters and so on, and then hand out free vegan meals on the street to try to promote the idea of ending world hunger by encouraging a plant-based diet. So we organized all of this stuff, and we go out every day to Harvard Square or Park Street Station and do street theater with our food. And before we're doing that, every morning we wake up and drive around and pick up bread from the bakeries and produce from the different organic markets in town. And then some of us would go and deliver that to housing projects, and we had a schedule where we went around every week to different projects, and the Rosie's Place, the Battered Women's Shelter. And then we would, other people would be making meals in the house and then bring the vegan meals out, hand it out, where we would do puppet shows, and we made little Super 8 movies that we project on sheets, and we'd have live music, and that's why it's kind of cool that we have the live music here, because it's very much like a Food Not Bombs original event that was happening. So I did that for 8 years in Boston, and then I moved to San Francisco. And we thought, wow, that's the most liberal city in America. It'd be really cool. The Grateful Dead were still touring. So we would set up at Golden Gate Park, and when the Dead was in the Bay Area, there'd be hundreds of extra people coming there, all in tie-dye clothing with all their drums and everything. And then we had music too, and it was wonderful. And then this hippie came by and said, hey, you could get a permit to do this. And we're like, oh, really? And you go, yeah, just write a letter to the Parks Department to give you a permit. And we did so naively, thinking that there was a chill town. But instead of getting any response from the Parks Department by like calling us up or mailing us some letter or something, on August 15th of 1988, 45 riot police emerged from Golden Gate Park and arrested 9 of us for sharing food without a permit. And that started this whole thing where people would start calling us up and writing us, asking how they could get arrested in their town. Because it turned out the police were not very smart, which might be a surprise. But what they did was they contacted the media, and they came out, and there was a newspaper man took a photo of riot police guarding the table. And there was a big headline, 9 volunteers arrested feeding homeless at Golden Gate Park. And people were like astounded that that had ever happened. And so that attracted more people to join us. And so the next week, roughly 100 people showed up, and we marched down 8th Street, banging pots and pans. We got to the end of the park, we handed out the food, and riot police came and arrested another like 24 people. And that day, there was a new TV company called Cable Network News, and they broadcast the arrest around the world. And then 4 people started writing us and calling us. And fortunately, I had been taking notes on how to start another Food Not Bombs, because this was one that was started from scratch. It wasn't like an evolution like the first one. And so I took my notes and I made a flyer called 7 Steps to Starting a Food Not Bombs. And then that, we'd mail that to groups, and people would start their own chapters. And before long, there were groups in Canada, there was a New York City group, there was Washington, D.C., there was a group in Seattle and Portland, Oregon, and a group in Melbourne, Australia. And so at the end of those month of arrests, the government decided, okay, we're going to give you a permit to stop the arrest. Which was a very interesting lesson, because what it was trying to assert was that the government could, in fact, give you permission to do something that you have the right to do, which is just hand out free food and hang out with your friends and hand out flyers. It's like you don't need permission to do it. But that really nailed it down, that how the government's idea of controlling what goes on in their city, particularly if they're threatened by the message, will evolve into this whole elaborate thing where they ultimately spend tens of thousands of dollars trying to stop this. But every time they arrested us, more and more groups would start up. So now there's roughly, we believe, roughly 1,000 cities in the world have Food Not Bombs activists doing something. Might not be every week, but they're doing whatever they can. And so in the midst of that, when I made the first flyer, 7 Steps to Starting Food Not Bombs, a publisher in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, saw the flyer and thought it would make a good start for a book, and then I should write a book. So the first book that came out was called Food Not Bombs: How to Feed the Hungry and Build Community. And it was a little, like 8.5 by 5.5 size book, 127 pages, and it had vegan recipes for 100 in it. And then that was before like the type of printing that we have today. So you would have to print like 1,000 copies and so on offset printing press using film. So there ended up being 3 editions. The second and third ones published by C Sharp Press by Chaz Buffet in Tucson, Arizona. In the end, it sold 10,000 copies in English, and it sold thousands of copies in Spanish and French and Russian. It sold a few hundred copies in Croatian, and so on. And it just helped spread the idea of Food Not Bombs. But because that had vegan recipes for 100 in it, and people knew I was an anarchist, they would then buy the Anarchist Cookbook. They would open it up, the original one that was published in 1971, written by William Powell, and they would look through it for the vegan recipes, and they would find how to make C4, how to booby trap, how to poison people, how to make LSD, and they would be like mystified, going, well, I thought we were making vegan recipes, what's up with this? And so, eventually, the FBI got really hip to that book, and they would start to hand it out to people that they wanted to frame. And they would circle the C4 or something like that and try to convince you to bomb something. And so, for years, Chaz and I would say, we should just rewrite the Anarchist Cookbook, because this is ridiculous that we're getting blamed for this book that we had nothing to do with. And the original author doesn't like the book, and it's giving people the impression that anarchists are about killing people and poisoning people, and there was actually virtually nothing in the Anarchist Cookbook that could even be remotely thought of as anarchist. There was no talk about being against a hierarchical way of organizing society, or information on equal rights, or property. None of these things. There wasn't anything about anarchism. Essentially, maybe you could find something in it about anarchism if you knew enough about anarchism to know that it was there. But an average person would never know that this was about anarchism. So then Powell ended up writing his own review of his book, which we then republish in here. And he hopes that the book goes away because it's caused so much pain and suffering to people, and it's been a needlessly horrible thing. And so we kept writing him saying, we want to redo the book. And at first he didn't respond. And eventually we found him. He's a school teacher in Kuala Lumpur, teaching alternative education at a private school there. And he's not an anarchist. He wasn't then, he's still not. And so he was like, go ahead, do what you want. And particularly he gave us permission to rewrite his denunciation of his original book. And then we approached Chris Hedges because he's so controversial around the issue of the Black Bloc and the article he wrote against the Black Bloc in Oakland. And actually, a lot of us anarchists were not really didn't really see the value of that Black Bloc action. Had problems with Black Blocs in past times. And so we want to have dialogue about what, beyond just the dramatically dressing in black and throwing rocks in the window icon of being an anarchist, there's a lot more to it than that. And so we chose Chris, and we approached him to write the forward. So, the final straw, though, that got us to do this, for me anyway, was that Food Not Bombs activists at Occupy in Cleveland were involved in the kitchen, and they were helping feed people.